Pull her aside. Women like that don't travel clean. The sentence hit the concourse like a slap. Conversations died midair, boarding scanners beeped unanswered, and every head at gate D14 turned toward the small woman standing at the security table. Officer Tom Haynes had said it loud enough for the passengers to hear. Maybe he wanted them to. Maybe he wanted her to shrink. But Priya Archer didn't shrink. She stood still, hands at her sides, face unreadable under the dull airport lights. The navy scarf around her neck fluttered once in the air conditioning before settling against her shoulder. She didn't reach for her bag, didn't argue. The silence around her did the talking. Sergeant Lan Holt stepped forward, jaw tight, eyes scanning her carry-on like it was already guilty. "Open it," he ordered. No greeting, no reason. The tone was the sentence before the trial. Priya met his stare. "I'll comply," she said evenly. "But note the chain of custody. Every hand that touches it, every minute recorded." A short laugh broke somewhere behind the security line. Someone muttered, "She thinks she's in court." The zipper rasped. The glove snapped. Haynes' gloved hand dug under the top layer of clothes, stayed there a beat too long, and came back up holding a small plastic pouch filled with white powder. He raised it high, not for evidence, but for theater. Gasps spread like spilled water across the waiting area. Lan Holt took it between two fingers. "You just made our morning easier, ma'am." Priya's voice stayed steady. "Test it here, in sight of witnesses." Lan frowned. "That's not our protocol." She folded her hands in front of her. "Neither is planting evidence." A woman waiting by the stroller line whispered, "Did you see his hand?" He reached into his own jacket first. Another man looked down, pretending he hadn't heard. Nobody wanted to be next. Ben Ward, the young gate agent, looked from the pouch to the woman. His Adam's apple bobbed. "Sir, her name's not even on the suspect list." "It's on the..." Lan's hand cut him off mid-sentence. "She's a suspect now, not a passenger." That word hung in the air longer than it should have. Suspect. Priya's jaw moved once, like she might speak, but she didn't. The crowd began to breathe again, slow and uneasy. Parents shielded their children's eyes, as if the scene were something indecent. The fluorescent lights buzzed louder than before. Haynes dropped the pouch into an evidence tray. "Narcotics," he said. "Probably cocaine." Priya tilted her head slightly. "You've tested it." Lan's smirk wavered. "We will. Then don't name it until you know what it is," she said. "That's rule 1 in false positive mitigation." It wasn't arrogance, it was precision. The kind of calm that doesn't flinch when the world wants you to panic. Ben Ward swallowed. He'd seen nervous travelers before, people who stuttered, cried, fumbled for passports, but this woman wasn't that. She looked like someone who'd been here before, not in this airport, but in this moment. The unfair one, the one where a brown face in a crowd becomes an open invitation for suspicion. Lan Holt leaned closer, voice low but sharp. "You think you're smarter than me?" Priya met his eyes. "No, just less afraid." That single line cracked something. You could hear it in the shift of the room, the way bystanders stopped pretending to scroll their phones. The radio at Holt's shoulder crackled. "Supervisor, confirmed detainment at D14. Confirmed," he barked. "And tell Grace McKenna we're processing a narcotic seizure." Priya exhaled once, slow. "You might want to wait before you call it that." Haynes turned toward her. "Why's that?" "Because if you're wrong, it's not a search anymore," she said. "It's fabrication." The pouch trembled slightly in his glove. For the first time, uncertainty flickered through his posture. Ben Ward looked down at the manifest again. The name Priya Archer glowed in black print next to a seat assignment. Business class, direct to Sydney. Corporate ticket. "Sir," Ben said quietly. "Her travel file says she's with..." Lan snapped. "You're done talking." But the word file had already reached the ears of the passengers closest to the barrier. A man in a gray coat murmured, "Sounds like they didn't check right." Another whispered, "Maybe they don't care." The scene had no shouting, no phones raised high, just a dense, living silence, full of judgment. Priya shifted her weight slightly. I'll say this once. Conduct the field test now. Use a standard reagent kit. That's the only way this doesn't turn into a lawsuit you can't afford. Lan's nostrils flared. Are you threatening me? I'm giving you a chance to do your job, she said. Properly. Behind the table, Haynes's hand hovered over the pouch like it might burn him. Sergeant, she's right. We could just run it quick. Len glared at him. No tests until McKenna's here. The intercom droned above them. Security oversight, please report to gate D14. The announcement wasn't for the crowd. It was for the record. Then Ward looked at the older woman standing nearby. She had tears in her eyes and didn't know why. Maybe it was the way Priya kept standing, shoulders square, voice even, refusing to break for their convenience. The pouch of powder sat on the steel table like a wound everyone could see, but no one wanted to touch. Lan Holt crossed his arms. You'll wait until oversight arrives. Priya's tone never changed. Then I'll wait. But remember, silence can testify too. The air around her seemed to hold its breath. Somewhere, a suitcase rolled over tile, wheels clicking a nervous rhythm. No one moved. When Grace McKenna's team finally entered the terminal, the sound of their footsteps echoed down the hall like an approaching verdict. And Priya Archer stood ready for it, calm, unflinching, and already 2 steps ahead of every man who thought her color made her easy to break. Grace McKenna's heels struck the tile in clean, measured taps, each one slicing through the air that had gone stale with waiting. She wasn't a woman who rushed. She didn't need to. Her badge carried the weight of consequence. Behind her followed 2 officers, one with a clipboard, one with a camera, both wearing the gray expressions of bureaucracy. The moment she stepped inside the cordoned space, Lan Holt straightened, shoulders tight, voice ready to defend what he hadn't even finished. Ma'am, we've detained a passenger carrying narcotics. Grace's eyes didn't blink. Field tested. Holt hesitated. Not yet. Pending authorization. You have it now, she said. The crowd's hum returned like a pulse resuming after a scare. Grace turned to Priya, who stood without moving, calm as if she'd been waiting for this particular oversight all her life. Miss Archer, do you understand why you've been stopped? Priya's answer was low, precise, without a tremor. Because the color of my skin suggested I fit a profile your officers don't even realize they follow. The words cut deep. Even Haynes lowered his gaze. Holt bristled. We followed procedure. Priya looked at the pouch of powder still sitting on the table. Then test it, she said. Let the procedure finish what your prejudice started. For a long moment, no one breathed. Grace finally gestured to Haynes. Run the reagent test. He fumbled with the small field kit, his gloved fingers clumsy under the eyes of too many witnesses. The hush around the table wasn't the quiet of respect, but of something heavier recognition, shame and suspense bound together. Haynes unsealed a small vial and prepared to drop a liquid onto the powder, but Holt's voice cut in, strained and sharp. Supervisor approval needed before field testing in front of passengers. Grace didn't even look at him. You've already performed in front of them. Now you'll correct yourself the same way. A few quiet gasps rose from the watching crowd. Priya didn't move. Her stillness was its own form of power. Every second she didn't flinch, Holt's authority cracked further. He leaned toward her, whispering through clenched teeth. You people always twist everything into race. Her gaze met his, unwavering. You people always pretend it isn't. He stepped back as though he'd been struck. The words weren't loud, but they carried the kind of sentence that doesn't shout to be remembered. Grace's voice broke the silence. Proceed. Haynes dropped the liquid, one small bead that trembled on contact with the powder. Nothing happened. No color change. No confirmation. The entire hall seemed to inhale at once. Again, Grace said. A second drop. Still nothing. Haynes cleared his throat. Negative so far. Holt tried to cover it. Could be a false reagent. Priya's tone stayed even. Or it could be flour. From the sandwich I packed myself. The quiet after that sentence was so deep it felt like gravity itself had shifted. Grace nodded to her assistant, who wrote quickly, record negative result, preserve sample, continue observation. She turned to Holt. You detained this passenger on what grounds? He struggled to find words, behavioral suspicion. Specifics. She avoided eye contact. Or you avoided seeing her, Priya murmured, just loud enough to be heard. Grace's look toward Holt was cold steel. You'll provide a written account before you leave this gate. Holt's throat worked around the word yes. Haynes stood frozen, the pouch still in his hand, eyes darting between the evidence and the woman he'd wronged. Ben Ward, standing just beyond the security tape, spoke softly. Miss McKenna, she asked for the test before they even called you. Grace glanced at him. You witnessed that? Yes, ma'am. Then your statement will be included. The small act of courage from the young agent landed like a stone in still water, rippling across the faces of passengers who had watched in silence too long. Priya's eyes softened just slightly, not in gratitude but acknowledgement. Thank you, she said quietly, for remembering what you saw. Grace signaled for the evidence bag to be sealed, her movements exact. We'll send this to the lab, but the field result stands. She turned toward Priya again. You're free to continue your travel, Miss Archer. We'll handle this internally. Priya's shoulders eased, but her posture didn't relax. Internal isn't always enough. Grace studied her, something like understanding flickering behind her eyes. You're right, she said finally, but it's where we start. Priya's gaze drifted toward Holt. Then start with him. Holt said nothing. The set of his jaw was gone, replaced by the kind of silence that comes when a man realizes he's already lost. The crowd's tension began to dissolve, replaced by uneasy whispers. Some people nodded subtly in Priya's direction. Others looked away. No one clapped. No one cheered. It wasn't that kind of victory. It was the quieter kind, the kind that left everyone thinking about what they'd just witnessed. Grace closed her folder. We'll escort you to the gate when you're ready, she said. Priya gave a faint nod. I'll walk on my own. As Grace stepped aside, the people watching parted just enough for Priya to pass. Every face she moved past held a different story. Guilt, relief, awe, fear. None of them would forget her. At the end of the terminal, she paused by a window where sunlight fell across the floor in long golden stripes. Outside, planes taxied one by one, their engines low and distant like thunder that hadn't decided if it wanted to storm. She stood there for a heartbeat, then spoke to no one in particular. You can cage dignity for a moment, she said, but it never stays where you put it. And she walked on, the sound of her steps folding softly into the rhythm of the airport that had, for a few breathless minutes, forgotten how to look away. Grace McKenna didn't walk away when Priya did. She watched her pause at the window, watched the sunlight trace the edges of her calm face, and something inside Grace shifted. She'd spent 20 years in airport enforcement, 20 years watching lines of travelers pass under fluorescent light, but few moments had ever made her question the uniform on her back the way this one did. Holt stood stiff at the table, trying to look useful, but the silence around him stripped away every layer of authority he thought he had. Sergeant Holt, Grace said finally, voice cool, I'll need your incident report before you leave this terminal. Of course, ma'am, he said, but the words dragged. You'll submit a statement too, Officer Haynes, she added. Every detail times, handling, contact. Haynes nodded, voice low. Yes, ma'am. His eyes were still fixed on the pouch sealed inside a clear evidence bag, like he couldn't decide whether to be relieved or ashamed. Ben Ward lingered near the tape, wanting to help, but unsure whether his voice still mattered. Grace turned to him. You spoke up, she said. That counts for something. Ben swallowed. I just told the truth. That's the part most people skip, she said. Holt let out a bitter laugh. You think we did this for fun? The pressure on security right now. Anyone matches a marker, we have to act. Grace's stare cut him short. You didn't act. You assumed. His mouth opened, then shut again. The words people like her were still ringing in his head, and now they sounded like something dirty.
Across the terminal, Priya was still visible through the window reflection, her posture composed but her eyes distant, as though she was already somewhere far away. Grace approached her slowly. "Miss Archer, I'll need a formal statement for the file," she said. "You don't have to, but it helps me make this right." Priya turned, the light sliding off her face. "You can't make it right," she said softly, "but you can make it matter." There was no anger in her tone, just a truth too heavy to argue with. "You work in aviation security?" Grace asked, half guessing. "I consult," Priya said. "Infrastructure audits, risk compliance. I was in Sydney last month evaluating screening protocols. And now here I am, searched, accused, humiliated in front of children." Grace's jaw tightened. "I didn't know. That's the point," Priya said. "No one ever does until it's their turn." The simplicity of it made Grace look away. Nearby, Haynes had removed his gloves, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Holt stood like a statue, but the stiffness was gone. He looked older somehow, smaller. "Archer," Grace said, voice lower now. "This investigation will be on record. I'll oversee it personally." Priya studied her, reading sincerity under fatigue. "Oversight means visibility," she said. "If your report disappears into a file room, then nothing changes. I've seen it happen." "Not this time," Grace replied. "I'll make sure of that." Priya nodded once. "Then start by writing what you saw, not what you're allowed to say." The words hit like an instruction from someone who'd written 100 reports herself. Grace didn't take offense. She opened her folder and began writing in long, quick strokes. The sound of the pen against paper filled the stillness left behind by tension. Ben shifted his weight, wanting to speak, and finally did. "Miss Archer, I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I should have said something sooner." Priya looked at him, her expression gentler now. "You did, eventually," she said. "That's what separates guilt from courage." Her eyes swept over the crowd, still half watching from behind the ropes. "Everyone else will go home and tell this story like it happened to someone else, but it didn't. It happened to them too." Grace stopped writing. There was truth in that, uncomfortable, unpolished truth. She closed the folder. "Miss Archer, would you step with me a moment?" she asked. They walked a few feet away, where the noise of boarding announcements could almost hide the conversation. "You handled yourself better than most people I've ever seen," Grace said. "That calm. It isn't easy." Priya's smile was faint but real. "It's not calm," she said. "It's survival. You learn it when you've spent your life walking through rooms where people decide who you are before you speak." The line struck Grace harder than she expected. She wanted to say something back, something about fairness or reform, but it all sounded hollow in her head. Instead, she nodded. "I'll need to verify your credentials for record," she said, professional again. Priya reached into her coat and pulled out a slim leather case. She opened it, revealing an identification card, embossed with an international seal, and her title in bold, Lead Risk Consultant, Global Aviation Oversight Division. Grace stared at it for a long beat. "You audit airports," she said, "including this one." "Starting next week," Priya replied. "Guess I just got a preview." Grace exhaled slowly. The reality of it unfolded like a quiet storm. Holt had not just profiled a passenger, he humiliated someone with more authority than anyone in this terminal. "Miss Archer," she said, her voice low. "What do you want me to do?" Priya met her eyes. "Tell the truth. In your report. In every meeting that follows. That's all." She turned then, adjusting her scarf, eyes fixed on the gate ahead. Grace watched her walk away, her reflection shrinking in the glass until only the sunlight remained. Holt approached, hesitant. "Am I dismissed?" Grace looked at him for a long time, then said, "You will be." He flinched. "Ma'am, I didn't mean—" "You did," she cut in. "And that's the problem." Ben Ward watched as Priya disappeared down the corridor, and he knew, without understanding why, that nothing in this airport would feel the same again. Grace picked up the sealed evidence bag, the harmless powder inside shifting like dust.
Write it down, she told her assistant. Every second of it. Don't let the silence erase her. The report didn't take long to write, but the weight of it lingered long after Grace handed it over. Priya's footsteps echoed down the corridor, each one quieter than the last, until only the hum of the terminal filled the space she'd left behind. Grace turned the sealed evidence pouch over in her hand, the fine powder inside sliding like dry gilt. She motioned to Ben Ward and Haynes. Lab verification now. Her tone was clipped, but her eyes betrayed exhaustion. They followed her to the testing room near security headquarters, a sterile box of stainless steel and humming machines that smelled faintly of bleach and consequence. Holt trailed behind them, stripped of his swagger. His badge looked heavier now, like it belonged to someone else. Priya was not there physically, but her presence hung over them like a conscience. Grace set the pouch on the counter. Open it, Haynes. He hesitated, looking at Holt as if for permission. Holt avoided his gaze. Grace's tone sharpened. You heard me, Haynes sliced the seal and poured a trace of powder into a small dish. His hands trembled slightly as he prepared the test. One drop of reagent, one reaction that could either condemn or clear. Grace folded her arms, eyes unblinking. The drop fell, struck the powder, and for a suspended second, the world held its breath. Nothing. No shift, no change, just a dull beige surface under white light. Haynes tried again. Still nothing. He swallowed hard. Negative. Grace's jaw tightened. Document it. The technician behind them marked the result in the logbook, his pen scratching across paper like an admission of guilt. Holt spoke up, his voice brittle. Could be the wrong reagent. Grace turned toward him. Could be the wrong officer, she said evenly. The words landed without volume but carried the full weight of humiliation. Holt's throat worked around a reply, but nothing came. You'll submit your resignation after the debrief, Grace said. And if you're thinking of explaining it as a mistake, don't. Mistakes don't come with slurs. He looked down, face flushed. The silence between them wasn't mercy. It was judgment without a gavel. Haynes exhaled and stepped back from the counter. What do we do with the evidence? He asked softly. Log it and destroy it once the investigation clears, Grace said, but not before it's photographed. Every angle, every fiber. It stays on record. Ben Ward stood in the doorway, his face pale. Ma'am, if this goes public, then it goes public, Grace interrupted. People need to know what happens when procedure bends around prejudice. Her voice cracked slightly at the end, but she didn't hide it. There was no room for hiding anymore. Haynes nodded slowly, shame and respect tangled together. Holt leaned against the wall, drained. She'll ruin us, he muttered. No, Grace said, her eyes still on the powder. We did that ourselves. She turned to Ben. Was she calm when it happened? He nodded. Too calm, he said, like she's been here before. Grace's face softened, lines of fatigue cutting deeper. She probably has, she whispered. Just never this publicly. The technician sealed the sample bag, labeled it, and handed it over. Grace took it with both hands, as if it were something alive. This stays with me, she said. Chain of custody ends here. When they stepped out into the main terminal again, the light had changed. The evening sun painted the concourse in a pale gold haze, and for a moment it almost looked peaceful, as though the building itself wanted to forget, but Grace wouldn't let it. She stopped by the same window where Priya had stood earlier. From here, she could see the reflection of her own uniform, the badge, the creases, the authority stitched into fabric, and for the first time, she didn't feel proud. She felt accountable. You ever wonder, she said quietly, not looking away from the glass, how many people we've passed in here who never said a word? Haynes looked at her, unsure if she wanted an answer. I do now, he said. Ben shifted uncomfortably. Ma'am, what happens next? Grace's reflection blinked slowly. Next, she said, we tell the truth, whether anyone wants to hear it or not. Behind them, Holt muttered something about lawyers, but his voice no longer carried authority, it carried fear. Grace turned and walked back toward the gate, her footsteps steady, the evidence bag pressed to her chest. Every passenger she passed looked away too quickly, afraid to meet her eyes. Maybe they knew what had happened, maybe they didn't, but Grace did. She knew the sound of a life almost ruined by assumption. She knew the silence of witnesses who did nothing until it was too late. And as she stepped into the empty checkpoint, she realized that Priya Archer hadn't just survived injustice, she had forced it to look at itself. The drop that hadn't changed color had changed everything else. It had burned a truth into them all. Sometimes the light doesn't expose what's hidden, it exposes who's been hiding. By the time the internal inquiry gathered in the small conference room above the terminal, night had folded itself over Harborview Airport. The noise of departing planes rose and fell like slow breathing beneath the floor. Grace McKenna sat at the head of the table, the evidence bag in front of her, its contents dull and harmless in the yellow light. Across from her, Lan Holt sat rigid, his uniform neat, but his hands unsteady. Haynes sat beside him, quieter than he had ever been. Ben Ward had been called as a witness, his badge looking too new for the weight of what he had seen. The room smelled of coffee gone cold and tension too old to hide. Grace began without raising her voice. For the record, this meeting concerns the unlawful detainment and racial profiling of passenger Priya Archer. She looked at Holt directly. Sergeant, your actions place this entire department under review. You will speak truthfully. Holt's mouth twisted into something between apology and defense. I acted on instinct, he said. She fit a description from our alerts. Grace leaned forward slightly. A description or a prejudice? He didn't answer. The difference matters, she said, because one protects lives and the other destroys them. Haynes swallowed hard. She asked for a test, ma'am, he said. From the start, I should have done it right then. Why didn't you? Grace asked gently. Because Holt told me not to, Haynes said, his voice cracking, and I didn't want to look weak. Grace's eyes softened, but her words didn't. Following a bad order doesn't make you strong, officer. It makes you part of the harm. He nodded, eyes burning. Ben Ward looked down at his folded hands. She was calm, he said quietly. Too calm, like she'd done this before. Grace turned toward him. That's what survival looks like, Ben. It's not calm, it's exhaustion that learned how to stand up straight. The words hung in the room, heavy as confession. Holt shifted. You're all acting like I'm some monster, he muttered. I made a mistake. Grace's tone was sharp now. No, Sergeant. A mistake is forgetting a form. What you did was a decision. You saw a woman of color and decided what she was before you asked who she is. Holt's jaw clenched, but his eyes wavered. Who is she, then? Grace paused. You didn't read the clearance I submitted this morning? Archer isn't just a consultant. She's the lead for the Global Aviation Oversight Division. The air in the room thinned. Ben looked up. Haynes blinked. Holt's face drained of color. That means, Grace continued, she evaluates airport operations worldwide for compliance, including ours. You didn't just insult a passenger, Sergeant. You profiled the woman who writes the standards you broke. The silence that followed was almost unbearable. The truth had come full circle, not as vengeance, but as revelation. Holt's mouth opened, but no words came. His authority, his certainty, all of it dissolved in the space between heartbeat and regret. Grace pushed the file toward him. You'll sign your statement, you'll apologize in writing, and you'll turn in your badge before you leave this building. Holt stared at the badge, then at the window where his reflection stared back. A man built on fear, undone by the same thing. His voice was small when it came. Yes, ma'am. He placed the badge on the table with a quiet clink, a sound that marked the end of something bigger than a career. Haynes spoke up softly. What about Miss Archer? She's been informed, Grace said. She declined to file charges for now. She said accountability means more than punishment. She wants process, not vengeance. Ben let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. She really said that? Yes, Grace said. And then she said something I can't stop hearing. She looked at each of them in turn. You tried to make my skin the evidence. It never was. The words filled the small room, quiet but searing. Grace stood, gathering the files, her expression unreadable. We will issue a public acknowledgement, she said. This department will change how it trains, how it screens, how it thinks. She hesitated, then added, and maybe how it listens. The meeting ended not with gavel or applause, but with the kind of silence that asks for redemption. Holt left first, his steps heavy, the sound of his boots echoing down the corridor like penance. Haynes lingered, staring at the badge on the table. I wish I'd done something sooner, he said. Grace placed a hand on his shoulder. Then start now, she said. Learn from it. Outside, the terminal lights dimmed to their midnight glow. Priya stood by the glass again, watching a plane rise into the dark. Grace approached quietly, stopping beside her. It's done, she said. Priya nodded. Nothing's done, Grace. It's just written down now. She turned to face her, voice steady, eyes reflecting both fire and fatigue. You can't erase what happened, but you can make sure the next woman who looks like me doesn't have to memorize her dignity before she travels. Grace swallowed the lump in her throat. I'll try, she said. Priya's expression softened just slightly. Trying is a start. She reached for her bag, adjusted her scarf, and stepped toward the boarding gate as the final call echoed through the terminal. Grace watched her go, the faint sound of her footsteps carrying something larger than victory, proof that quiet resistance can shake even the hardest ground. And as the plane lifted through the night sky, Grace whispered to herself, You don't own the ground. The words settled deep. A promise, a reckoning, a vow to never look away again. If this story moved you, don't just scroll away. Hit like, share it with someone who still believes silence is harmless, and subscribe for more stories that expose truth in the places people try to hide it. Before you go, tell me in the comments, what would you have done if you were standing in that terminal? Would you have spoken up or stayed quiet like everyone else? Your answer might say more than you think.